Last year we designated certain graves, and this year we're just going to sort of stroll through, and I'll stop and tell you I've got a couple that I want to share with you. I'm not going to try to make you walk a lot because we worry about you tripping on a stone and it's Sunday, we don't want to do a funeral today. Okay, so if you have questions as we go along, feel free to ask. I know many of the people here, when I took over the funeral home, this next section over was called the new section, and it was only filled in way to the back. And now, through the years, I was in the funeral home for 25 years, and now it's filled in, and we have a new section way over there. So I will point out where I know people are and tell you a few stories about them. I'll try not to be disrespectful unless they led a life that was disrespectful. Then I'll tell it the way it is, okay? I chose this to start out with because this is the Kinney Monument. Kinney's used to own a variety store here in town around the turn of the century. And I think a lot of their family was from the New York City area. And the roof of this building is all one piece. And it was placed here in, I think, the early 1900s, like around 1906. It came in by train to where the creamery is, where across from the laundromat where Quick's Concrete is. And that used to be the creamery. It came in by train, and they rolled it on logs all the way from the creamery to here. They had the building built, and they put dirt on one side and built a ramp, and then had the horses pull it up onto the roof to be the roof. So that's solid granite there. And I chose the Kinney family because way in the back, in an unmarked grave, which was previously marked, is the grave of Ida Jordan Wilson. Some of you may remember Ida Wilson. She was a school teacher here for 100 years, at least 100 years. Ida spoke at her 50-year class reunion, which was my graduation year. And it took Ida, I think we counted 42 minutes to deliver her alumni speech. And it started out like this. We took our senior trip, which we accomplished by selling spools of thread from Kinney's store. Mr. Kinney was gracious enough to donate the thread to our class. And we decided that we would take our trip to Boston on the train. And we boarded the train at the depot in Candor, where now the Tioga State Bank is. A building that probably should never have been torn down, but it was. And we got on the train in the depot in Candor, and we went over the hills and down through the valleys. Over the hills and down through the valleys. Over the hills and down through the valleys. And we arrived in Appalachian. And then we went over the hills and down through the valleys. And so I went down through the valleys, over the hills and down through the, and we arrived in Binghamton. And it took us 42 minutes to get to Boston and back. Just over the hills and down through the valleys. Ida wrote a book called The Hills of Ida, in which she talked about a lot of the natural beauty of our area. She had a husband that was a cantankerous person, and when she died, she was cremated. When she died, he burned all her books in a pile in the dooryard and threw her ashes on top of them, came down, took her monument off the grave, and sold it. So, but Ida's given us a lasting memory of over the hills and down to the valley. Just beyond that that stone there with the round topper, back there a ways, is the Silvestro family. Some of you may remember the Silvestro family, the older couple. The parents were Peter and Mary Silvestro. Mary was around 4'11", and when you'd see her driving, you would think there was a car coming at you without a driver. She had an old Buick, and she would most often ride her bicycle. Most often she would ride her bicycle. They had chickens in the chicken house, and one day as I was walking by there, I heard this commotion, and Mary was out beheading the chickens to get ready for Sunday dinner. Her husband Pete, they were from Italy, they were Italian people. Her husband Pete was a barber for at least 100 years. And he was a barber well into his 80s, I believe. And their son, Everett, or Young Pete as they called him, he was also a barber. And they had their barber shop where the village, right in the building where the village chapel is, right next to Johnny's old store. And so when we would go to get our hair cut, my brother here and I, we would argue and pray who was going to get old Pete, because by the time we were young, he had a bit of Parkinson's. And he'd take those clippers and head for your ear. He only nicked my ear once, but that was with scissors, and I think he just wanted to do it quickly and get it over with. But that was the Silvestro family. Their daughter, Pete and Mary's daughter, Annette Silvestro, was a registered nurse working at Ithaca Hospital and happened to be the delivery nurse for me and my twin sister Philip. And in 1950, when we were born, she was the delivery nurse. And she always told me about, they always believed that we were only one child. And my mother would say, but there's 8 arms and legs in there, so maybe it's an octopus. She knew it was twins, the doctor didn't, and Annette told me that my father went to call everyone to tell them that he had his son, and who was going to be a baseball player, which I wasn't. But he got back, and the doctor says, you also have a cheerleader. So she was our delivery nurse. They lived on the corner of Foundry Street and Maiden Lane. I don't know if any of you now know where Maiden Lane is, but it runs right by Gwen's house on Main Street down to Foundry Street, and the barbecue place was there. Jim's Barbecue. That was the house that Pete and Mary Silvestro lived in. On up the street, on the corner, was Augie Yost's house. Augie and Mabel, I think, was her name. And Augie was a World War I vet who always talked about, he was the person who took care of General Pershing's horse in the war. So we had some very, very notable people in Candor, barbers and horse caretakers, and probably a few horse thieves. I don't know, but let's stroll over this way and see who we find.